New Orleans Saints rookie quarterback Tyler Shough is almost certainly going to be the starter in 2025, but that doesn't mean that the door is completely closed for second-year passer Spencer Rattler. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Tyreem Powell is one of the three UDFAs that I think could surprise once they get the opportunity in training camp. The Derek Carr situation is far from over. Let's explore every possibility. And we're going to kick everything off, with Spencer Rattler, who does not have the door closing on him just yet, even with the selection of Tyler Shough. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn your TV into your Xbox with no console required. Just head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Look, it's very likely, and I can say with a lot of certainty, that Tyler Shough will be the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints as early as 2025. But that doesn't mean that the door is entirely closed for Spencer Rattler, even though he might kind of get the short end of the stick here. And when I say the short end of the stick, I'm not really saying anything negative about the Saints. I'm certainly not saying anything negative about Spencer Rattler himself. Bright young man, incredibly smart, very football smart as well on the field, has a lot of tools, has a lot of fans in the building, has a lot of fans on the coaching staff, and I'll tell you for a certainty has a lot of fans around the NFL as a whole, front office and coaching staff wise. You pick this kind of stuff up, spending time at the NFL Combine and at the owners' meetings and things like that. And so there's always going to be some of that chatter about the opportunities that he could potentially have somewhere else. But for the Saints, I think that really what this comes down to is a measure of circumstance, right? Spencer Rattler was drafted, showed some promise, but then the coaching staff that drafted him was fired, was canned, ended up going elsewhere. It's a variety of different things. Then a new coaching staff comes in, and that new coaching staff puts their stamp on a different young passer, and that's going to create an environment where, regardless of what it is that you do, closing that gap is going to be very challenging. And I think that's the circumstance that now stares Spencer Rattler in the face. And it's not necessarily something that's going to be done to spite him. It's not something that's going to be done because he's done anything wrong. It's not something that's going to happen because the Saints are actively closing the door on him. It's just simply the circumstance, right? Think about it this way. Like if I was only hosting this show, let's say for 6 weeks, erase the past 7 years that I've been hosting this show. I actually started hosting this show, I think it was right after Marcus Davenport was selected. I outlasted Marcus Davenport in New Orleans. Maybe one of the least shocking things to happen in sports media. I think that, or at least in New Orleans media. And so I think that, like, if I was here for 6 weeks and all of a sudden David Locke, our founder and president, he ended up appointing someone else in charge, and then she comes in and hires somebody else because she either decides that she wants co-hosted shows or wants, 2 shows per team or something like that. And then all of a sudden, there's a reversal of that and they need one show host. I'm kind of at a disadvantage in that situation. Sure, I've been here for 6 weeks, but the new person running the building, they've chosen their own person. And very likely she will then choose that person because that's the person that they chose, right? And so no matter what, that's kind of all that it comes down to. It's not always last one in, first out, especially in the NFL. Typically, it's newest one in, first solidified oftentimes in this league. And so it unfortunately is just the business. And here's the other truth about Spencer Rattler and the Saints. We don't know yet if Tyler Shough is going to pan out. He's got a lot of good qualities. He's got a lot of good traits. We just did a film study that I'm going to be sending out to all the insiders. I'll tell you more about the insider program later, but you can find more in the description on that. I'd love to have people subscribe to that so you can see these film studies and everything that I can't do here on the show. And so I think that, like, you look at all of the good traits and good qualities that Tyler Shough has, you still need to be able to put all of that together at the NFL level against NFL competition, at NFL speed, and all those other things. Like, there's still elements of the Tyler Shough story that have yet to play out. He hasn't taken a snap as an NFL quarterback just yet. He's got a training camp to make it through healthy, all of these other things. And so the Saints should be in no hurry to, if they make the decision to go to Tyler Shough, which I expect that they will. We'll get to the Derek Carr stuff here in a little bit, but I don't think Derek Carr is either going to be playing or even, maybe not even on the roster going into 2025. But even if you make the decision to go to somebody that's not Spencer Rattler, I don't think you're in a hurry to get Spencer Rattler out of your building. Because what if things don't work out with Tyler Shough and then all of a sudden you see tremendous growth from Spencer Rattler? Or what if things are kind of progressing slowly with Tyler Shough and they feel like, we really don't want to turn to him week one. But here's Spencer Rattler, who's had this great leap over the course of the offseason. Go with him week one, and then eventually maybe you might turn things over to Tyler Shough if you find that you need to. And then if that ends up being the case where you don't have to turn to Tyler Shough because Spencer Rattler turns into this great starting NFL quarterback, then all of a sudden you've got a good problem. You've gone from having no quarterbacks to having potentially two young quarterbacks, one of which on a fifth-year rookie deal, the other of which on a second-year rookie deal, both massively important and massively useful for your opportunity to rebuild this team once you're back right with the salary cap and once you're back out under the Derek Carr contract. It's not a bad situation to be in. And at the absolute worst, if he stays on your team and is a backup, a fifth-round quarterback becoming a backup is a win in terms of what you're looking for in the NFL draft. And so even if that were the case, to where Tyler Shough immediately becomes a starter, holds on to the starting job, performs well, all of that, and you get a backup quarterback on a fifth-year deal, or excuse me, in a fifth-round rookie contract, that's also excellent for you. Because you have somebody that's going to grow in your system, that's going to learn your system, that's young, that you can teach, that can develop to be your backup. And that is an excellent spot to be in. I do think that the Saints need to bring in a veteran. Shout out Teddy Bridgewater. Let's see if it happens. I don't know if he even wants to play anymore, but that's what I would do. I'd be calling him up. Still got his information, probably still on speed dial. Give him a call. See what he's got going on. But man, when it comes down to the story with Spencer Rattler, it's far from over for him. And look, let's acknowledge, too, that he could potentially see his future play out elsewhere. The Saints could potentially say, okay, Tyler Shough's the guy. They bring in a new veteran quarterback. Derek Carr is either off the roster or opts for surgery. He's out for the 2025 season. And then some team calls and says, we'll give you all of this for that. And they're talking about Spencer Rattler. Then maybe you give Spencer Rattler the opportunity to go and compete somewhere like Indianapolis, which is a dumpster fire right now when it comes to quarterbacks, right? Or whatever, right? Some other team that has an injury at the position or something like that. Same thing for Jake Haener. Could be a trade, somebody that somebody's willing to trade for. Could be somebody that just gets the opportunity to go somewhere else, a la Ian Book. There's a lot of different ways that it all can work out. But to say that the story is completely finished for Spencer Rattler would be short-sighted. There is still massive opportunity for him, whether it's as a backup here in New Orleans, whether it's as a potential starter here in New Orleans, or whether it's as a potential starter elsewhere. There will always still be, at least for the next couple of years, a lot of opportunity for Spencer Rattler here in New Orleans as well as elsewhere. So I don't think we should close the book on the young man just yet. Let's see what he's got over the course of training camp. Coming up next, even though we believe that Tyler Shough will be the starter week one, still a lot of question marks that you got to answer around Derek Carr. So let's review some of the possibilities and what they all mean, including what happens if something fishy is going on. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. And even though the New Orleans Pelicans aren't making the playoffs this year, you still have an opportunity if ever you're out of town or you're somebody that doesn't live here in New Orleans, you're taking in Locked On Saints because you're not finding the news elsewhere. You can find your tickets for your favorite basketball team or just something going on in your city over with Gametime today so you can be a part of all of that excitement and energy without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Why? Because with Gametime, people save up to 60% by buying last-minute tickets on their app. And with the all-in pricing option toggled on, it means no surprise fees at checkout. They take all the guesswork out of buying tickets over at Gametime. You can do the same. All you got to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints / Derek Carr fiasco, saga, whatever, scenario continues to roll along and continues to get interesting by the moment. Obviously, Derek Carr dealing with a lot of personal stuff over the course of this offseason. Absolutely no one should have to go through what he and his family went through. He talked about it during the sermon that he did over at Church LV and everything. Obviously, huge. There's just been a lot outside of even that, though, that has continued to push this narrative between what the future of Derek Carr is here in New Orleans as a football player. I'm always very firm. There's the player, there's the person. And I think that those two things are very important to always acknowledge. And so when it comes down to Derek Carr, the player, things not going great in terms of how let's say the outlook looks for 2025 and the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints expected Derek Carr to be their starting quarterback in 2025, which is among the possibilities still in terms of what can happen. So what I wanted to do was look at 3 firm possibilities that could indeed take place. One of which is that Derek Carr plays in 2025 and he plays in a New Orleans Saints uniform. Another of which is that he does not play in 2025 and does not play in a New Orleans Saints uniform. And then number 3 is that he either does or does not play, but in any case, he does not do it in a New Orleans Saints uniform. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at here, just to kind of measure out all of the different possibilities. The first possibility that we should acknowledge is that there is always the case that at some point, either at the beginning, before the season begins, or even after the season begins, if he starts the season on physically unable to perform or NFI, whatever would be appropriate for the rehabbing of his shoulder and maybe, or the rehabbing of something else, and then realizing a situation with the shoulder, however it goes, that he could potentially still play for the New Orleans Saints in 2025. I don't think any fan wants that. I don't think that many people are looking forward to that being the case when it comes to Derek Carr. I think people are kind of sold on Derek Carr in terms of, or sold off of Derek Carr, I suppose, in the city. And so I don't know that that would go over. I think that would be very tough for the New Orleans Saints to sell. It would be very tough for Derek Carr, I imagine, to make this triumphant return only to be met with a lot of backlash in the process, or to potentially have the option to be able to come back, rehabbing the shoulder and everything like that, and the Saints saying, nah, actually, we're good. Got Tyler Shough. You just kind of sit on the bench. Like, that's not really a great situation to put yourself in as an organization. So you're better off probably, and what is the most likely scenario is scenario number 2. But I want to acknowledge that scenario number 1, Derek Carr playing for the New Orleans Saints in 2025, is totally possible. It is within the realm of possibilities. I just don't see it happening. It's a very, very unlikely possibility. But we can't call it 0%, right? Scientifically, we can't call it 0%. We can call it 0.01%, which is about as high as I'd go. But we'll certainly call it 1% if that's the case. Now, the more likely scenario, which is kind of one of the ways that I see this all playing out, is that Derek Carr does not play in 2025, but remains in a New Orleans Saints uniform, remains with the New Orleans Saints. What I mean by that is that before the season begins, he elects for surgery. That surgery ends up sidelining him for the 2025 season. He goes on injured reserve, PUP, physically unable to perform, and then just sits on the roster in 2025. And then everybody can kind of figure out what the future holds for 2026, which likely would be a post-June 1 cut designation that sends him elsewhere. Maybe you work out a trade or something like that if you can make the numbers work, if he's willing to reduce his salary so that you can trade him without restructuring him first and all this other stuff, then there's certainly ways that you can kind of go about that. If the New Orleans Saints were to go that route, nothing really changes for their financial situation in 2025. The key for 2026 would be how you get him off the roster, right? How he leaves. Is he willing to reduce his salary to save you money, and then you can trade him to help facilitate a trade? The dead money's the dead money already at that point, $49-ish million and everything. Not really a lot's going to change there. If he doesn't agree to reduce his salary in order for you to be able to trade him, then you might have to restructure him, and then you push more dead money into 2027. and all these other things, then you can maybe trade him after June 1st or potentially cut him, designate him as a post-June 1 transaction. You can also designate him as a post-June 1 transaction without restructuring his deal, in which case you end up, holding on to a large sum of money until June 2nd, at which that frees up, which might not be very advantageous for New Orleans. So a similar situation would take place in 2026 if he were to remain on the roster here in 2025, in order for him to move on or for the Saints to move on, however it is that you want to look at it, as what was on the table for 2025. Very similar situations, just kind of less money at play, but still a significant amount of money nonetheless, right? Then there's the third option, which has a couple different iterations. And the third option is that he does not play or does play in 2025, but none of that happens while he is associated with the New Orleans Saints. There's kind of three things that can happen here. The first of which is that he ends up getting moved in some way. You can trade him post June 1. He goes to another team. Then when he arrives at another team, he's like, hey, by the way, I got to get the shoulder surgery right quick. And then bang, he doesn't play in 2025. And then some team has made some investment, a cheap investment in him going into 2026. I don't foresee that happening. I don't think a team trades for a player that has the real chance to say, nah, I'm not playing because my shoulder hurts or because I need the shoulder surgery. It's not just that his shoulder hurts. If he needs the shoulder surgery, then it's a very different thing. So I don't see that happening. I don't think a team trades for him unless there's some team out there that's desperate enough and they're sure that he's going to play in 2025. So those are the two things that end up kind of changing the variation of what happens there. The other option is that the Saints designate him as a post-June 1 cut, and then he can either go to the market and then sit out for a year while he gets that surgery done, or he decides he doesn't need the surgery. He is able to rehab it. He signs somewhere. They can get him on the field, put him on PUP, get him on the field when he's eligible to return after a few weeks of missed time as he rehabs the shoulder. That is also a possibility as well. In the situation in which New Orleans Saints trade him, about $1.2, $1.3 million follows him with the team. The Saints they actually save about $1 million when they save that $1.3 million that rolls with them. That's not really that much money, but they would hold on to $19 million of dead cap this year, and then next year, $49 million of dead cap would set in. If they were to cut him post June 1, $20 million is the dead cap hit for this year, which basically is moving on from him, but not shipping that base salary of $1.3 million elsewhere. And then you still incur the $49 million, or rather defer the $49 million of dead cap into next year. Now, here's where things get a little tricky. And I want to be really careful about how I say this because I don't know that this is going to happen. And so I don't want anybody to get like their hopes up that the Saints could end up recouping some of their money from Derek Carr's contract or something like that. But there is a world in which, the Saints find that whatever happened with his shoulder happened away from their team-sanctioned and NFL-sanctioned rehab and practices and all those other things. He hurt his arm skiing. He hurt his arm golfing or something like that, right? I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm not saying that this is going to be the case. But Nick Underhill over at New Orleans Saints Football shared a clip of Derek Carr at the end of the season on January 6th, basically saying, no surgery is going to be necessary unless there's a setback. So if there was indeed a setback after that did not happen during what would be NFL sanctioned, then there is a chance that if it is considered and designated a non-football injury or happened doing something that was like a breach of contract, then the Saints could potentially cancel out some of those guarantees and then get a bunch of that money back and then have like a really, really clean break. I don't foresee that being the case. But if something like that were to happen, first of all, major story. And like the 30 for 30 is going to be crazy and all this other stuff, like wild. I don't foresee that happening, but it is one of those other, less than 1% chance things that we have to acknowledge could end up happening. And so for anybody that's curious about what that would look like, there you go. And again, I have no information that says that it's going that way or that it will be that or anything like that, but we're acknowledging it as a possibility loosely so that you kind of understand a little bit of like what all the spectrum of things that can happen is. The things that are most likely is that he either doesn't play in 2025 and he sits on injured reserve on an injury list for the year and then departs in 2026, or he ends up being cut or traded by this team to another team and he maybe plays, maybe doesn't play in 2025. I still think those are the two most likely things, and that is what opens up the door for another veteran quarterback to be added and maybe for the opportunity, as we expect, for Tyler Shough to be the quarterback in 2025. Okay, there you go. Everything you need to know about the possibilities around Derek Carr. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints have 11 undrafted free agents. I want to give you three that I think have the opportunity to surprise this offseason. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know that your Amazon Fire TV Stick is also an Xbox? Yes, you can turn your TV into an Xbox. No console required. How cool is that? All you need is a compatible controller, your Xbox Ultimate Game Pass with EA Play included, and then you can play a bunch of great titles, including like EA Sports College Football 25 and all these other things. My favorite way to use that, by the way, is when I'm traveling, right? I don't want to lug around a console, but maybe I still want to play a game here and there. That is one of my favorite parts, mobile gaming, when it comes to the Amazon Fire TV Stick. Take your Xbox controller, and then you can log in from anywhere without a console required. So head over to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started today. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and a compatible controller are required. No console necessary. Available on select devices, including the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and the Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I'm here to give you now, as we wrap up today's show, the 3 UDFAs that I think could surprise throughout this year's offseason, whether it's preseason, training camp, mini camps, all that good stuff. We highlighted the 3 that I think have kind of the most direct, that have a real shot to make the roster. These are 3 guys that could maybe surprise some folks. Although I want to lead off with one that I do think has a pretty direct path to the roster, and that goes to Tyreem Powell, the linebacker that's coming in. And I think that he's somebody that we should all be paying a ton of attention to. Coming out of Rutgers, has a great relationship with Isaiah Pacheco, former Rutgers running back over with the Kansas City Chiefs. But 6'4", 239-ish pounds, was a team captain last year. That checks the box. 201 career tackles, 11 and a half of which for a loss. That checks the box. And then 5 career sacks. Played a little bit more of like an outside linebacker role over at Rutgers, and something that could be interesting for New Orleans as well, because we talk a lot about the stand-up rusher. But beyond the stand-up rusher, you need the other guy on the outside that might be able to stand up and rush, but also can drop back, can prowl the middle of the field, can serve and run defense, all that kind of stuff. And I think that Tyreem Powell could be a really interesting candidate, not necessarily to be like a starter in that role. Maybe that's a Danny Stutzman role or something like that during the rookie year. Or maybe that's where a guy like DeMarco Jackson or Anthony Orji or Nephi Sewell end up being able to kind of see a bigger role carved out for them, whatever that might be. But I do think that a guy like Tyreem Powell could end up being a quality backup and developmental piece, much like Anthony Orji was, much like Nephi Sewell has been, or I guess both are. I think that he could be one of those guys. So maybe he makes a practice squad or something like that. But look, here's the thing that I think is great. There's something that you can't teach about him, that you can't teach that stands out about him, and that's his reach. 34 3/4 of an inch long arms. That would make an offensive lineman jealous. Wingspan of 82 inches, 82 5/8 inches would also make an offensive lineman jealous. He's also got extensive special teams experience, particularly in punt coverage. So let's review, right? Unteachable, fantastic traits in terms of his reach and his size, right? Is playing at a position where the Saints definitely have, it feels like, open roster spots, right? Linebacker is a spot where we've been looking at for this team and saying, okay, there's need there over the course of the offseason. So you get Danny Stutzman, now maybe you have Tyreem Powell. And then you add on top of that extensive special teams experience. That's your path to a roster spot right there. And so whether that's on the 53-man roster or on the practice squad, watch out for Tyreem Powell. I think that he's a guy that could absolutely make a roster for you. The next guy that I wanted to highlight is SMU wide receiver Moochie Dixon. And I'm going to tell you some basic things about him real quick. 5'11", 183 pounds, 4.38 40-yard dash with a 10'10" broad jump. So speed, explosion, size, 74 career interceptions with 1,205 receiving yards and 8 touchdown catches. Not like a stat sheet that jumps off the page for you, but still a player that I think you might want to keep an eye out on. And here to give us more about that, I'm going to turn things over to a former wide receiver that knows what he's talking about, our good friend Lance Moore, who's a part of our Saints squad, which airs live every Monday morning at 8 a.m., every Thursday morning, moving to 8 a.m. Make sure you come and check that out. But here's what Lance had to say about why he believes that Moochie Dixon is a name to watch.
I just think he's pro-ready. I think he's great as far as separating. He has great ball skills. He's a hand catcher. And the thing that jumped off the tape the most to me is that dude is a finisher, right? Like he's not catching the balls, getting tackled. He's not catching the balls and falling down. He's catching them and he's getting yards. Like, and you know, he's a guy that can separate from defenders once he's got the ball in his hands. And to me, adding yet another potential weapon into this offense is going to do wonders for what Kellen Moore is able to call as far as the plays go and make it tough on defenses to be able to defend all of the guys. And watching him on tape as well, he's got versatility as far as playing outside, playing inside.
Great stuff from Lance there. Really appreciate everything that he's been doing with us over at the Saints Squad. Make sure you come and check us out once again live every Monday and Thursday, 8 a.m. And of course, the video and audio live on far after that too. So you can always go back and check out other episodes. So Moochie Dixon, definitely a name to watch. There's another wide receiver in Notre Dame's Chris Tyree, who's really interesting as well. He was a running back that transitioned over to a wide receiver once he got to Notre Dame. So something to watch out for there as well. Kind of like a, you know, Ty Montgomery, Velus Jones Jr. type, right? In terms of his ability to be able to move around and contribute in a bunch of different spots. So really interesting sort of group there. But I want to wrap up here with South Dakota State defensive back Dallas Beenum. He's a guy that comes in with extensive special teams return experience, 3-time special teams player of the week over the course of his career, but also had 12 career interceptions at 6 foot, 195 pounds. So he's got good build. He can contribute at the position that he plays naturally, a la Rico Payton, but then also has this return experience. And the Saints haven't really done or brought in a lot of players this offseason that have return experience, right? They kept Dante Pettis. You have Rashid Shaheed. Rico Payton's already on the roster. Taysom Hill when he makes it back, whatever point during the season, which is probably going to be late in the year. So you have some guys that certainly can contribute there. Jordan Mims. But Kendre Miller did some of that too. But in terms of new faces, really the only players that the Saints brought in this offseason that have extensive return experience are Quincy Riley, who I think is going to be one of your starting corners this year, and then Dallas Beenum. So that would be the other name that I would watch out for throughout all this. All right, to wrap this up, I wanted to also highlight one last player just for our lanyap, if you will, for this episode. And Dylan Sanders talked about this a bunch over on the Saints squad, but James Burnip, definitely a name to watch. 6'6", 236 pound punter, insane measurables there. Held Alabama opponents to 1 yard per punt return last season in 2024. Had 20 punts go over 50 yards, one of which hit 64 yards. There's going to be a punter battle again this offseason, and James Burnip is going to be the reason why. So watch out for him and Matt Hayball to have a bit of a battle over the course of this offseason. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, there's a few more undrafted free agents we haven't discussed, so I want to get to that. And then I want to take a look at where the New Orleans Saints go from here. If Keenan Allen is not an option at wide receiver, are there other wide receivers that could be worth their time? But let's just be real, and I'll just be real with you now. The pool is dwindling. So we got that coming up for you next in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family is doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.